What sparked America's race to the stars, and who were the brave pioneers who risked everything to make it happen? Project Mercury wasn't just NASA's first manned space program, it was the ignition point for humanity's journey beyond Earth. But how did a nation with limited spaceflight experience send astronauts into orbit in just a few short years? In this video, we dive into the dramatic story behind Project Mercury, uncovering the technology, tension, and triumph that shaped history. What secrets still lie beneath the surface of America's first steps into space? Stay tuned, you might be surprised by what you discover. The Mercury spacecraft was NASA's first crewed space capsule, developed in the late 1950s to send a single astronaut into space and return them safely to Earth. Small and compact, the spacecraft was just over 6 feet long and about 6 feet wide, shaped like a blunt cone with a rounded nose. Inside, space was tight, just enough room for one person, surrounded by a complex array of controls, gauges, and life support systems. Every inch of the capsule served a purpose, balancing weight with function to survive the intense heat of launch and re-entry. Unlike later spacecraft, Mercury didn't offer much freedom for the astronaut. There was no ability to maneuver in orbit, just enough control for attitude adjustment. Still, it featured several groundbreaking innovations, including heat shields to withstand re-entry temperatures, parachutes for a safe splashdown, and explosive bolts to jettison the hatch in emergencies. Each Mercury capsule had a slightly different configuration, evolving from test flights to the final missions with astronauts on board. Ultimately, the Mercury spacecraft proved that humans could survive and function in space, paving the way for the Gemini and Apollo programs. Though it may seem primitive by today's standards, it was a bold first leap that captured the world's imagination and launched the U.S. into the space age. The Mercury Redstone was a key launch vehicle in the early days of the U.S. space program, playing a pivotal role in Project Mercury, the first American effort to send humans into space. Developed in the late 1950s, it was a modified version of the Redstone ballistic missile, originally designed by Wernher von Braun and his team at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. Standing about 83 feet tall, the Mercury Redstone was a single-stage, liquid-fueled rocket powered by a redstone engine that burned a mix of liquid oxygen and alcohol. It was capable of producing around 78,000 pounds of thrust, enough to carry the Mercury capsule and its astronaut on a suborbital flight. The most famous Mercury Redstone mission was Mercury Redstone 3, which launched Alan Shepard aboard Freedom 7 on May 5, 1961. This historic flight made Shepard the first American in space, reaching an altitude of 116 miles and a maximum speed of over 5,000 miles per hour. Though the flight lasted only about 15 minutes, it was a monumental step in the space race and helped pave the way for orbital missions and, eventually, the Apollo moon landings. Mercury Atlas was the launch vehicle used in NASA's Project Mercury, designed to send astronauts into orbit. It was a modified Atlas D missile, adapted to carry the Mercury spacecraft safely into space. The first successful crewed flight using Mercury Atlas was Mercury Atlas 6, which launched John Glenn aboard Friendship 7 on February 20, 1962, making him the first American to orbit Earth. The Mercury Atlas rocket stood 95 feet, 4 inches tall and had a diameter of 10 feet. It featured an abort sensing and implementation system to protect astronauts in case of an emergency. The rocket was launched 9 times from Cape Canaveral between 1960 and 1963. Glenn's mission lasted 4 hours, 55 minutes, and 23 seconds, completing 3 orbits before safely splashing down in the North Atlantic Ocean, where he was recovered by the USS Noah. The success of Mercury Atlas paved the way for future space programs, including Gemini and Apollo, ultimately leading to the moon landing in 1969. Mercury Freedom 7 was the spacecraft used in Mercury Redstone 3, the first U.S. human spaceflight, launched on May 5, 1961. Piloted by Alan Shepard, it was a suborbital flight lasting 15 minutes and 28 seconds, reaching an altitude of 101.2 nautical miles, 187.5 kilometers, and a downrange distance of 263.1 nautical miles, 487.3 kilometers. Shepard named the capsule Freedom 7, setting a precedent for Mercury astronauts naming their spacecraft. The mission's primary goal was to test human capabilities in space and demonstrate the ability to withstand high G-forces during launch and re-entry. During the flight, Shepard observed Earth, tested the capsule's attitude control system, and manually positioned it for re-entry. After re-entry, Freedom 7 parachuted into the North Atlantic Ocean, where Shepard and the capsule were recovered by the USS Lake Champlain. Though a major success, the mission came just 3 weeks after Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, completing an orbital flight. Mercury Liberty Bell 7 was the spacecraft used in Mercury Redstone 4, the second U.S. human spaceflight, launched on July 21, 1961. Piloted by Gus Grissom, the mission lasted 15 minutes and 37 seconds, reaching an altitude of 102.8 nautical miles, 190.4 kilometers, before splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. The flight was successful, but after splashdown, the capsule's explosive hatch unexpectedly blew open, causing water to flood in. Grissom narrowly escaped, but Liberty Bell 7 sank and was lost for nearly 38 years until it was recovered in 1999. The spacecraft was unique among Mercury capsules, featuring a centerline window instead of portholes and a painted crack design, resembling the historic Liberty Bell. The mystery of the hatch failure remained debated for decades, with some theories suggesting static electricity may have triggered it. Mercury Friendship 7 was the spacecraft used in Mercury Atlas 6, the first U.S. crewed orbital spaceflight, launched on February 20, 1962. Piloted by John Glenn, the mission lasted 4 hours, 55 minutes, and 23 seconds, completing 3 orbits around Earth before safely splashing down in the North Atlantic Ocean, where Glenn was recovered by the USS Noah. The spacecraft was launched aboard an Atlas LV-3B rocket from Cape Canaveral, reaching an orbital altitude of 162.2 by 100 statute miles and a velocity of 17,544 miles per hour. Glenn conducted scientific observations, including viewing sunrises and sunsets, and tested the capsule's manual control system. However, a faulty sensor incorrectly indicated that the heat shield might be loose, leading NASA to instruct Glenn to keep the retro rocket pack attached during re-entry as a precaution. Despite the tense moments, Friendship 7 successfully re-entered Earth's atmosphere, enduring 7.7 Gs before parachuting into the ocean. Glenn's flight was a major milestone in the space race, proving that humans could function effectively in orbit and paving the way for future missions. Mercury Aurora 7 was the spacecraft used in Mercury Atlas 7, the fourth crewed flight of Project Mercury, launched on May 24, 1962. Piloted by Scott Carpenter, the mission lasted 4 hours, 56 minutes, and 5 seconds, completing 3 orbits around Earth before splashing down in the Caribbean Sea. Carpenter named the capsule Aurora 7 to symbolize the dawn of a new era in space exploration. The spacecraft was launched aboard an Atlas LV-3B rocket from Cape Canaveral, reaching an orbital altitude of 154 kilometers, 83 nautical miles, perigee, and 259 kilometers, 140 nautical miles, apogee, with an inclination of 32.5 degrees. Carpenter conducted scientific experiments, including observations of liquid behavior in microgravity and Earth photography. However, a targeting error during re-entry caused the spacecraft to land 250 miles, 400 kilometers off course, delaying recovery for nearly an hour. Carpenter was safely retrieved by the USS Intrepid, but NASA partially blamed him for the landing error, leading to his departure from the space program in 1964. Mercury Sigma 7 was the spacecraft used in Mercury Atlas 8, the fifth crewed flight of Project Mercury, launched on October 3, 1962. Piloted by Walter M. Wally Schirra, the mission lasted 9 hours, 13 minutes, and 15 seconds, completing 6 orbits around Earth before splashing down in the Pacific Ocean, where Schirra was recovered by the USS Kearsarge. Schirra named the capsule Sigma 7 to emphasize engineering precision and reliability. The spacecraft was launched aboard an Atlas LV-3B rocket from Cape Canaveral, reaching an orbital altitude of 156 kilometers, 84 nautical miles, perigee, and 285 kilometers, 154 nautical miles, apogee, with an inclination of 32.5 degrees. Unlike previous Mercury missions, Sigma 7 focused primarily on engineering tests, evaluating spacecraft systems and fuel efficiency rather than scientific experiments. The mission was highly successful, demonstrating that longer duration spaceflights were feasible. Schirra maintained excellent fuel management, allowing the spacecraft to drift for extended periods to conserve resources. He also participated in the first live television broadcast from a U.S. crewed spaceflight, transmitted via Telstar 1, the first commercial communications satellite. Mercury Faith 7 was the spacecraft used in Mercury Atlas 9, the final crewed mission of Project Mercury, launched on May 15, 1963. Piloted by Gordon Cooper, the mission lasted 34 hours, 19 minutes, and 49 seconds, completing 22 orbits around Earth before splashing down in the Pacific Ocean, where Cooper was recovered by the USS Kearsarge. Cooper named the capsule Faith 7 to express his faith in the spacecraft, his team, and the mission itself. The spacecraft was launched aboard an Atlas LV-3B rocket from Cape Canaveral, reaching an orbital altitude of 165.9 by 100.3 statute miles and a velocity of 17,547 miles per hour. This mission was designed to test long-duration spaceflight, pushing the Mercury program's capabilities to their limits. During the flight, Cooper conducted scientific observations, including Earth photography and monitoring spaceflight effects on the human body. Toward the end of the mission, Faith 7 experienced electrical failures, forcing Cooper to manually control the spacecraft during re-entry, a remarkable feat that demonstrated astronaut skill and resilience. Project Mercury was the first U.S. human spaceflight program, running from 1958 to 1963. Its primary goals were to orbit a human around Earth and return them safely, investigate human capabilities in space and how astronauts could function in microgravity, develop and test spacecraft systems for future missions. The program conducted 6 successful crewed flights, from Alan Shepard's suborbital flight aboard Freedom 7, and ending with Gordon Cooper's 22-orbit mission aboard Faith 7. Mercury proved that humans could survive and work in space, paving the way for Project Gemini and the Apollo moon landings. Key accomplishments included John Glenn's Friendship 7 mission, making him the first American to orbit Earth. Scott Carpenter's Aurora 7 flight, testing manual spacecraft control. Walter Sciarra's Sigma 7 mission, demonstrating fuel efficiency and spacecraft reliability. Gordon Cooper's Faith 7 flight, proving long-duration spaceflight was possible. Mercury laid the foundation for NASA's future space programs, proving that humans could live and work in space while advancing spacecraft technology. Two unfortunate downsides is that the Russians launched Yuri Gagarin into orbit before the United States launched Alan Shepard on a suborbital flight, and with the exception of Yuri Gagarin's flight on Vostok, each of the Vostok cosmonauts spent more time on orbit than all of the Mercury astronauts combined. In conclusion, Project Mercury was a groundbreaking achievement that laid the foundation for human spaceflight. Running from 1958 to 1963, it proved that astronauts could survive and function in space, setting the stage for Project Gemini and the Apollo moon landings. The program successfully launched 6 crewed missions, including John Glenn's historic orbital flight aboard Friendship 7 in 1962. Mercury demonstrated the feasibility of orbital flight, tested spacecraft systems, and provided critical data on how the human body responds to space conditions. The lessons learned shaped future missions, leading to longer duration flights and more advanced spacecraft designs. Though Mercury was a short-lived program, its impact was profound, marking the beginning of America's journey into space.